Hi everyone, we meet again with Adam today. If you haven't watched the last video, Adam runs a channel called Twig and Root, and he kindly shares his experience about living off the land and his take on permaculture. So, Adam, thank you so much for joining us today. I have a question. How have things progressed for you since we last met, and are there any new projects on the horizon?
Thanks, Eva. Um, there have been a lot of planning of projects, but the one that I've been working really diligently on right now, just because the weather is appropriate for it, it's very dry right now. So I'm doing a lot of earthworks that are not going to be uh, demolished by mud or rain. So I'm doing water harvesting earthworks on the hillside, and then as soon as I can, hopefully this fall, I will start planting the bottom side of those earthworks so that they will not get eroded away. So that's been my biggest project.
So, when it's dry, is it easy to dig the soil?
If there's rain, it's easier to dig, but if it's dry, then your progress, your work won't get washed away. I dig in both, but I'm still learning the timing of when's the best time to dig in the soil, because if I start digging and I see a lot of activity in that soil, uh, I feel really bad because I'm just destroying the homes of worms and bugs and things like that. So there's a time of the year where you'll have less of that. So I'm still learning that, and it's kind of just a case by case basis. If I'm doing any digging where there is topsoil and it's kind of obvious in the summer because you'll have grass or some sort of vegetation, I take that first layer off and I set it aside to be composted or just to use that valuable topsoil as a resource. And then the subsoil, I'll start digging. Um, I'm doing a lot of quote damage right now because I'm moving a lot of earth, but the benefit that'll come from this kind of tiny amount of digging is going to be compounded because I do the work once, and for the next 100 years, it's going to pay back to myself and the land.
Or even sooner?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
In our last talk, we chatted about how you really love growing plants and making your surroundings nicer with useful and also edible plants. You even mentioned that you secretly planted on other people's properties. So let's dig into the reasons why you do all of this, why it matters to you, and what good things come from having lots of different plants around.
Oh, so many beneficial things happen from having plants around. Um, so with permaculture, you focus on living systems, and that kind of means if humans were taken out of the equation, that system is going to continue going. So I look to nature a lot and see, okay, if there's a flowering plant and there's a pollinator on it, whether it's a bee, a hummingbird, dragonfly, I notice that. And then if there's no flower later in the season anywhere on my property, I take note of that too. It's just naturally something I observe. And someone told me once that it's a starvation tactic for the insects if you don't have something in bloom as much as you can. So that's just right off the bat something really beneficial to having multiple types of plants on your land is the pollinators move in, then other things move in, and you start to build an ecosystem and it compounds on itself. Other than that, if I have to get in my car and drive to the grocery store, spend currency to get food packaged in plastic, drive it back to the house, process it usually in another way, and then get rid of that trash, wouldn't it be easier if I took 1% of that and it's right outside my doorstep? I just open the door and I have something growing right there that's pre-packaged. It doesn't have plastic on it. You just pop it in your mouth and you go about your day. Um, so that's something that really excites me about growing food is you can grow it anywhere essentially. So wherever you work, play, sleep, you can have food growing. And the more of that you do, the better your life becomes. You become healthier, the food is better, and you start to meet because, here in the States, at least where I am, that's kind of a weird thing. People grow annual gardens, um, but they don't grow perennial systems.
Let's explore this topic, why perennial plants are so important and why permaculture emphasizes, these type of plants and other beneficial plants so much. Um, is it connected to resilience?
Definitely. So perennial systems are so much more resilient than an annual crop-based system. They require less water. They are typically far more diverse. They have more uses and they require less input. Uh, you don't see humans, for the most part, going into a natural, developed, mature forest and maintaining it. It just does it on its own. Uh, they help more rain come into that local environment. And the slogan is a forest grows on a fallen forest. So if a tree falls, you don't have to do anything. It'll rot in place and then bacteria will move in and start to break that down. That feeds the next succession of trees to grow up into the canopy. It is a beautiful system that is not created by humans. So when you practice permaculture, you're mimicking that system because that system works and it's very resilient.
Absolutely. Oh, I love how you explained that. I think another way to put it is, annuals require bare soil to grow, and perennials don't. Oftentimes, you can put a perennial plant, as you've mentioned, like even in the forest, and it still should grow really well. Um, so yeah, and we don't have to do so much work with perennial plants.
Yeah,
So yeah,
and there's a place for both. Um, I have annual crops from time to time. I encourage other people to have them, but it's so much less work with a perennial system. Um, you plant something once and then you move into maintenance. You're not constantly tending. So that's why I like it because it's easier.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, next question. We last chatted about creating special microclimates. So plants outside your hardiness zone that can grow in your climate. I think this is a really fascinating concept. How does this strategy contribute to the overall diversity and, again, resilience of the landscape?
That's a great question. So you have the normal plants that will grow in your area, just because the climate is the way it is. You have a certain amount of water, and it doesn't change that much. Um, so you have a set amount of diversity that fits within that window. If you can move just outside that window on both sides, where you can create something, a little bitty area of your yard or your property that is slightly warmer or slightly colder, or maybe it stays wetter or drier. The amount of diversity you can pack onto your property at that point, it is immense. Like it gets crazy. You start opening up options for what you're able to grow. I mean, it's almost like the sky is the limit. With that said, these wing plantings that I call them, you're able to grow earlier in the spring and later in the fall if you choose to. Your main focus should be the crops that normally grow in your area, the perennial plants that normally grow there. because the wing plantings typically take more infrastructure, more work to maintain because it's not that natural native plant to your area. But if you have one or two of those plants on both sides, the spring and the fall, your resilience just goes through the roof. Because if you have a season that's a little bit wetter or a little bit drier and your normal crops fail, you're sitting there with another crop to get a yield from. So it is very resilient to have these extra wing plantings and to create as many microclimates that you possibly can after you have your main food producing elements normal to your climate growing.
Thank you. That's a really good answer. In the last video, we talked about creating special microclimate by using stones and their function, of them absorbing the heat and releasing the heat, for example, at night. So plants surrounded by stones take advantage of that. Do you know any other ways of creating special microclimates?
Uh, yeah, like there's a lot. So the reason a microclimate, which is just a small version of the normal climate, the reason it gets created is because of the things that don't change. Your wind direction is typically pretty constant throughout the year. At least, as it changes, you can predict it'll be blowing this way in the summer. It comes from a different direction in the winter. The sun angle is going to be the same. You can calculate those things. So if you put an element on your property that like say I put something here and the sun is here, you're now going to cast a shadow that's going to stay wetter longer after it rains. That's going to be slightly cooler in the summer when everything else is getting hit by direct sunlight. That's going to be in the shade. You can really have a lot of fun with this idea and play around with it. Okay, if I have a flat field and it's just hit by the sun all day, and that's my normal climate, normal amount of rain, normal amount of sun, and the temperature is constant. What happens if you start placing elements in there? If you grow a slightly taller bush, slightly smaller bush, if you put ground cover, um, it's endless. Like you can really have a lot of fun with it and use it to your advantage. Because if you see your crops getting stressed, that's because it needs a little bit more protection. So just provide the protection.
Amazing. I love that answer. So, while discussing permaculture, you mentioned that the elements like a rock wall can serve multiple functions beyond aesthetics. Can you elaborate on a specific example of how you've incorporated such multifunctional design elements into your landscape and how this approach align with the principles of permaculture?
Oh, okay. So the way it aligns with permaculture is you're wanting multiple benefits or multiple uses anytime you do something. So a road is a good example. Um, Everybody knows that if you make a road, you're going to drive on it. That's the use that everyone knows. But you can start to consider that as a catchment for water, that is a compact surface that bamboo or other plants won't grow across. You can start to stack all these different things. It can funnel wind. It can be such an asset for your land. And that's what I try to do. I'm stacking rocks, gathering them, stacking them, doing all of that work. It's a lot. So I need to make sure that it's a walkway, it's a heat trap, it's going to soak water, that, especially it's not going to do any damage. Um, So it's out of necessity that anytime I do some work on the property, it has to have so many beneficial functions, which is a keystone thought of permaculture is stacking functions and having multiple benefits for your efforts.
One question popped to my head. For beginners, perhaps people listening to it might think of that as creating too much work for yourself. Um, can you can you address that?
For sure. Um, so if you think it's too much work to design a better road, think of all the maintenance that you need to do on a road that is poorly designed. If you place a road in the wrong location, even if it's a short driveway, you're going to have erosion. You're going to need to maintain that road more than if it was placed in the right place. Maybe an easier example to understand. I want to plant a fruit tree. Let's say it's a pear tree. I plant that pear tree in a location because I didn't think about it. And it grows kind of short, doesn't produce a lot of fruit. I can do the work to think about where's the best place for that tree. It grows taller, it produces more fruit. You're taking a little bit of time up front, and the results are going to benefit you. So that's what I would say if you think, oh, this sounds like a lot of work, that's a lot of effort. With the rocks, I get it. Like, if you don't want to stack rocks, that's fine. That's what I have on my property. Um, Use what you have, and more often than not, it's not going to be as hard as you think it might.
I love the answer. Brilliant. So it's like, you know, we put all this work in the beginning and it might be overwhelming. That's why it's better to start, in zones. First, you start to work in zone like closer to your home, and then only when you're ready, you can expand further. So once you create all this base infrastructure and your plants are in the right spot, like few years down the road, it's just you will have so much less work. Most likely you will be just picking fruits and not doing much more work. So I think that's why um, people that like are fascinated about permaculture, I think this is one of the number one reasons why people choose to implement permaculture principles. And I'm glad that you've explained it so well to our audience.
Yeah, and if you're nervous about it, maybe I should say it a different way. One of the most beneficial things that I learned from permaculture is the idea of zones, planting things close to your house. That's something that I did not do originally, and I suffered from it. Yeah, I wonder if that's more common than I realized. But once you have this knowledge of, oh, these are how all the things work together, you can make better choices and you move plants closer to your home, and you can it makes it so much easier.
Absolutely. I totally agree and speaking from experience. Right. In our last meeting, you said that you had great outcomes on things that people said you couldn't do. So tell me, what are these things and how did you deal with them?
Um, so I would say I am the third generation of people that have tried to farm or grow some sort of food on this, pretty small portion of property. It used to be a lot bigger, um, and there's rock just below the surface, so there's not a lot of topsoil. It's on a slope, which is ideal for permaculture. But a traditional farmer looks at a slope and says, I either need to make it flat or I need to move because that's not farmable land. Um, so, minimal amount of digging, understanding the water flows. There was corn grown on the land for a very, very short amount of time, and it did not produce very well. And I started trying all these things early on. well before I took a PDC course, and I was told by everyone who knew what I was trying to do that that's not going to work on that property. So I am growing berries. I am starting to grow fruit. I am capturing water, which is another thing people said I couldn't do. I mean, some things that are I take for granted because it seems really simple. Oh, you just capture water where it is in the land where it falls. And I was told that was illegal, which it's definitely not here. Um, People have these ideas and they heard it from someone that they probably respect or somebody with authority, and they never check it. They just keep on believing. And there's a different way. You can decide for yourself what's morally appropriate, what's legally right, and you can move forward. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't do something. It might take you a little bit longer to go this windy path to get to your destination, but there's so much that you can do, uh, even on a really degraded piece of land with no topsoil, which most permaculture projects that are online that are being showcased, they're in the worst places in the world, the worst environments, really bad growing conditions, and they make oases. You can do it too.
Can you name those specific examples?
Last time I mentioned Greening the Desert project in the Dead Sea Valley in Jordan. And then there's a family in New York. Their their YouTube channel is Edible Acres. Really fantastic educational type permaculture YouTube. They have a really small property, but Sean, the guy who does most of the talking on the channel, when he started out, he couldn't afford a lot of property, so he bought land that was previously a meth lab. So somebody was making methamphetamines. The land was super contaminated. He cleaned it up, grew food, made the soil better, did all these things on a shoestring budget. He had no money. And he sold that land. He was able to buy the next piece of property. I don't know if he showcases that on his YouTube channel. I just know that personally that that's how he got to where he is today. And then uh, one of my absolute favorite projects is Brad Lancaster's project in Tucson, Arizona. Him and his brother bought a really degraded piece of property. The home was either condemned or about to be condemned. It was extremely hot. It was in desert environment in the city. Just look it up. You will say anything is possible, uh, because he's really done some amazing stuff. It's always worth remembering. I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong. Krameterhof. It was Sepp Holzer, I think is the guy's name, and it's in Austria. Really steep landscape, and I don't know if he even uses the word permaculture. One thing I found fascinating about him that I didn't hear from other people is he talks about using all of your senses. When I look at a landscape, I'm looking at the geography and things like that. He talks about smelling and tasting and hearing, and that's how he designs places. And he's gone all over the world and done projects like that where he shows up and it does not take him long at all to come up with these amazing solutions.
Wow. I've never heard about that part. Uh, I knew about his work and like rehydrating the landscape, the steep landscape, the terracing, but designing with senses, that's new to me, and I will immediately look it up because it sounds fascinating. The next question. In the last video, you mentioned the idea of resources starting to gather all around you. Can you elaborate on this concept?
Okay, so the phrase that I have in my head that I heard from somewhere else is once you start doing the right thing, resources will gather around you. It is really simple to me to think that way because, like I was saying before, if you plant a tree in the appropriate spot, it will produce more fruit. Um, it can be that simple. Something that's a little harder to explain is you start moving forward and um, you need something. You need something to complete the project, whether it's a shovel or a wheelbarrow. You know, kind of odd. These things will just show up, which is a little bit wooey, I know, but I think it has something to do with once you set your goals and your target, you start to ask better questions. You go from somebody who says, "Oh, I need to make more money and I need to grow more food." It's so vague. And then you study permaculture, at least I did. And now my question is, who has a 200-liter tank that will hold water that they can give? That's a very specific question. And that happens over and over. So that's one reason why these resources just start to come to you because you know what to ask for, you know what you're looking for. And if you just plant water, you put a pond in a spot where there was not a pond before, of course you're going to have water there where you didn't before. It can be really simple.
Wow, I like your answer because I was thinking about completely, maybe not completely different, but I was thinking about another different example, and I was thinking about the edge effect in permaculture. That's kind of related to resources as well, because when you use the edge effect, for example, you you can notice how resources gather on the side of a forest, because all the wind blows and then you have those branches. And another example would be creating a pond in irregular shape. So whenever there is edge, you will have like more plants and more animals, because those animals will hide in those corners and there will be more life. um, so yeah, I guess what I was thinking about maybe intentional design of a landscape, but how you've described it, it's a much broader, and it's also related to being smart and planning ahead and having all those different features um, on our lands and creating this resilience. So I love that.
Yeah. And if there's anyone watching that doesn't know what edge effect is, because I certainly didn't. I heard so many people talk about edge, edge, edge. I didn't know what they were saying. It's where two ecosystems meet. And maybe that's even too complex. It's you have water and land. And the spot where
Mhm.
those two meet, you have two different worlds coming together. It can be two communities, that area between them. So that's the edge effect.
Oh yes, absolutely. I like how you've explained it. Oh, immediately I reminded myself about my husband's comment, because when I was studying permaculture and I talked to him about the edge effect, he said, "Oh, I've used it today." And I was like, "What did you do?" I went up to the road and I gathered all the leaves that were falling from, upper hill. Because there is like a hill, there is a road, and we are below the road. And he really likes the idea of, you know, taking advantages of resources, free resource, especially free resources around us. So, he just scoops the leaves. People look at him like he's some kind of crazy person, but he doesn't mind. He loves that. And then, we make a compost.
Yeah. So I think that's a lot of what most practitioners are doing if they're working with the physical landscape. You're really just setting it up to just receive just all the time. And eventually you won't have to go get leads. They'll show up, all the way in the spot where he needs them. Um, because that's the nature of permaculture practice. you start to iterate on your ideas, your designs, and it just gets easier and easier and easier.
Okay. Mm, Speaking about resources, um, I'm going to switch the subject to energy sources. So recently, you published a video on DIY solar water pump. What's your take on solar energy? Do you think it's easy to implement for people with no prior experience in building solar setups?
Um, I absolutely love solar. It is complex. That is the
Mhm.
downfall. I would not recommend it for most people unless you have um, a person who's knowledgeable in that field help you out. If it's something small, or if you just have a passion for it, you want to learn, please go for it. But for most people, the number one thing you should do if you want to start heading in that direction is reduce energy consumption. It's like a sexy thing to produce power and create your own energy, but it's kind of boring to reduce your consumption of energy. But financially and all sorts of other beneficial ways, it's easier and cheaper to reduce consumption. And then if you want to move into producing power, it's even easier because you don't need to produce as much power. So on my channel, I have a video where I'm making an off-grid solar water pump for
Mhm.
farm. That is a temporary solution. I'm using that um, solar resource to pump water until we get the earthwork on the land situated. Because once we get ponds and trees and vegetation, that land is going to be hydrated. I will not need to pump water from downslope to upslope. That water is going to fall freely from the top of the hill and be caught and soaked into the land because it'll be vegetated. Um, so solar panels, and especially a solar water pump that runs off grid, for me, it's a very temporary solution. It's just so the client can get the ball rolling, see some progress early on, and keep moving forward, because the end goal is to have it way more passive. Because solar panels break, batteries die, things like that happen. It's a electrical failure point. Whereas if you have a living system, it's just the ground, it's gonna last. If it breaks, it's a wheelbarrow full of dirt to fix. It's really it's just better. I
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I guess these kind of setups would be also useful in some kind of emergency. If something happened and you really need that water somewhere higher in the landscape, there would be that possibility to just pump it up and use it from the lower source. So that's a great idea.
So if you're looking at doing something like that, and just to maybe have some limitations on your land where you're able to hold water lower in the landscape, and it's really a good spot for that water, and then you have a man-made tank or some situation like that further up the hill, uh, you can use that electrical energy to pump water uphill, and then it's there. Then the gravity can pull it down if you ever did
Mhm.
need an emergency situation. What I'm trying to convey is, if the power goes out and you are in an emergency situation, if it's just water that you're needing, make sure it's in a location where gravity is going to bring that water to you. It's the easiest. Um, there's like a low failure rate of gravity. Gravity's pretty constant. So use the electricity and the sun when you have it to pump it uphill, and then when you need it, or if it's an emergency, use gravity to pull it down.
That sounds like a really great strategy. Thank you so much for explaining it so well. The one thing I'd like to touch upon is the reduction of energy. So, Can you elaborate on that? Did you say it because there are, for example, different ways of producing energy, maybe at different points? Because if someone needs that energy, then yeah, they need that energy. Um, but are you talking about situations where the energy is produced and maybe not used efficiently? Um, yeah, if you could explain.
Sure, I'd be happy to explain. Um, this should be a video all on its own. There's so much to this. Some of my background is I was professionally trained to work on wind turbines, and then I have solar panels on my home here. So I have some degree of knowledge on renewable energies of that type. And the reason I say a reduction of energy is the first step is because it doesn't matter what angle someone is coming from where they would like to produce power. A reduction of energy is it just makes so much sense. There's uh, there's waste in the transmission of electricity. There's inefficiencies just with basic physics. I'm trying to keep this kind of simple. Every time you have an extra step in the system, there's an inefficiency. Maybe that's heat loss. It's just inefficient. But if you reduce power consumption first, you don't have to produce as much electricity if you reduce your power consumption first. I hope I said that in a simplified, understandable way.
Yes, I understand it. However, how could people, if they were really interested in this topic and reducing the energy consumption, where they can start?
Oh, okay. So um, there's two ends of the spectrum. One's very affordable, and the other is very expensive. Um, if you pay for water, maybe your municipality brings water to you, and for that service, they charge you monthly to have that water in your tap or your sink or your bath. If you just change the flow rate in your shower, your faucet, um, I don't know what it would be in liters, but let's say you reduce it from 2 gallons per minute to 1 gallon per minute, you've just cut that water use by half, which uses less electricity, which saves you money, and a aerator that will go on a sink faucet. It's like 50 cents. It's one of the easiest things you can do. If you really want to dive into this, I think uh, the most beneficial thing you can do that is still really affordable is capture rainwater and use that uh, for irrigating crops. If someone's watching this, they're most likely interested in growing food. You're using unnecessary electricity to pump water, to irrigate crops. Permaculture is all about efficiency and less work. You don't want to have to go get a second job to pay to use that water. Just capture rainwater. It can be as simple as digging a hole in the ground. You don't have to buy a tank. One book that I'll suggest, I have it here just because I've been reading it lately, is here we go, Rainwater Harvesting for Drylands and Beyond. So that's Brad Lancaster's book. Here we go. Um, he's a fantastic resource for getting things that are free and cheap and just reducing costs. And water is one of those things where the anything you could do with water is going to far outweigh something that you could do with solar panels or a wind turbine. And it's a lot simpler. Most people, it might take them years to understand how solar panels work. 2 weeks, and you can learn what you need to know about water.
That's a really interesting spin on this topic. Wow. Water first, and then all other energy systems if you're interested in setting them up. But basic steps such as saving water, maybe reusing the water, for example, I don't know, maybe you're washing your hands, you could capture that water and maybe use it to, I don't know, wash vegetables later. Simple things like that, I guess.
Sure, yeah, and if you're inclined to have that sort of lifestyle, because it can seem like an extra step for a lot of people living in a modern society. It might seem like a burden. If you're naturally
Mm.
inclined to that, you're gonna figure it out. Just look up some things online. Um, you will find so much information out there. I personally spent a lot of time looking into those things just because it's the type of daily life that I enjoy. I don't like wasting things. I don't like spending money either. So my gray water gets reused, things like that. But for the average person, the common advice that's given is, oh, change your light bulbs, and it's like kind of
Mhm.
controversial whether that will actually have a benefit or not, because it is a cost. Um, but again, water is just one of those things that is across the board really cheap to alter your water usage. If you have a toilet that flushes, that is clean drinking water that we are dirtying up and throwing it away. And it just, if you don't do anything else, you can open the back of the tank and put a brick in there, and that displaces the water. You now use that much less water. Um, but not everyone's going to do that. If you're interested in that sort of thing, you can go online, start looking up energy savings in general, and you can pick and choose which work for your budget and your personality.
Can you expand on the brick idea?
Okay, so if you have a flushable toilet and the tank that holds water above the toilet that will be the water that flushes it, you can take the lid off of that and put any object. It can be a water bottle filled with rocks, it can be just a rock, um, anything to displace that water because there's a float valve that will stop the water from going above that level. You put a solid object in there, you now have slightly less water to flush that toilet. So the water that fills up the tank the next time will be slightly less. So your water consumption will go down. You can play around with, oh, that wasn't quite enough water to flush it properly, so you put a smaller object in there. It's a game. You can play with it, or you can just go really far out there and use a composting toilet. That's what I do. I've had one for years. It's not dirty or gross, and it makes me feel really good that I'm not flushing clean drinking water on the drain.
I'm really jealous because this is what I want. We have. I know it's easy to create. We just have to, build a shed and then, you know, have some maybe wood shavings, and compost. Um, our manure and create humanure. I don't know if you're familiar with the book Humanure. Uh, Amazing. And we will link it in the description if you're interested. Um, but in terms of our toilet, it's not too bad because the water comes back to the land, so it's fine. But our friends who visited us, they are but they are getting more awareness and they live in the city in the blocks of flats, and they were complaining, they were concerned about all this water like being wasted, and they told us that they are jealous we have all this system and everything, and they said to not waste water, they are not flushing the toilet as often as they would normally be doing it. So just to save it, yeah, it's amazing. But I will tell them about the stone idea, the brick idea, or the heavy object, because that could definitely help. Thank you for that.
You can get it's called an aerator. It's just the thing that controls the flow on a faucet. Um, Maybe it's not appropriate for a sink where you're washing dishes because the flow might be too hindered. But if it's just for your hands or something like that, you can definitely try it out. And then also for your shower, you can get one that is very low flow and the pressure is still quite good. Um, but yeah, do your research. There's a ton of people with good advice online.
Oh, amazing. Awesome. I will definitely pass the knowledge on. Um, oh, I need to come back to the composting toilet. It would be so amazing to have one because uh, the property is kind of big. And, when we're far away from home, it's really inconvenient to run to home to use the toilet. So it would be uh, great to have it um, in different spots on the property. And that's something we will be building. It's just everything takes so much time.
I mean, I have I have two different types of composting pullets. Years ago, I was working a job that was paying me too much money, and I bought the deluxe model of composting pullets. It was over 1,000 US dollars, I think. I would never spend that kind of money on a composting pullet now, but
Wow.
it's 10 plus years, it's still working great. But I actually enjoy the bucket and lid outside better. Um, it's I get wood shavings from a carpenter, and it's a
Mhm,
plastic paint bucket that I got
mhm.
from a factory that I used to work at, and just a lid. It's really simple. I don't even have a structure around it. It's just in a part of the property where I have privacy, so it's like a fair weather bullet. But you can also just dig a hole in the ground. There's one project. I'll have to look it up, but I think it might actually be closer to you geographically. They have a wood structure and a hole in the ground, and they just go for months in that location. And then when they get ready to move it, the tree gets planted there. So it's really simple because they don't have an extra step of moving the humanure. They just have the
Yeah.
initial big hole bit.
Okay. So would you say it's okay to plant a tree maybe after 2 years
If it's not a fruit bearing tree, go for it. Like do it right away.
right away?
Um, yeah, but it's your own discretion. Um,
Hmm.
what I would personally do is make sure my human manure is in something where it's going to heat up.
Hmm.
In metal box with a lid, no animals are going to get in it,
Hmm.
and it's going to stay in that state for a year. After
Hmm.
that, all the heat has killed all the bacteria. And if you don't do it right, it's like it'll tell you. You'll know. You'll say, "Oh, that still looks too similar to what it was. That doesn't look like dirt or compost soil." You'll just know. And if you're scared, wait 2 years, wait 4 years, whatever you're comfortable with. Um, some people don't wait at all, and they're not dead. So,
Yeah.
but I can't give that kind of advice. I just know what I would do, and I have tons of trees that aren't fruit producing, so I don't need to wait.
Great. And for those who may be afraid or scared of this idea, trust me, after humanure breaks down, it looks like a normal soil. It looks like compost. It looks like topsoil. I was touching it. I've been on a permaculture farm in Ecuador. I've seen it. I've seen the breakdown process. it doesn't even smell, in fact, it smells nice. It smells like a really good soil. So, definitely a topic worth exploring, I think. Um,
Cost saving, and it's
yeah,
convenient, and um, it's a full circle. You're keeping nutrients on your land. There's there's so much of this resources leaving properties when they don't have to. They could be used and benefit you right there on the spot.
absolutely. Oh, I'm so glad we've touched upon this subject. Amazing. Next topic. In the last video, you've mentioned that you've been dealing with external forces like unregulated landfill or water runoff from the road, and these issues can be really complex. Um, can you walk us through a specific case where you applied permaculture principles and strategies to mitigate the impact of these challenges?
I can't think of anything specific that I've implemented permaculture to deal with a social situation like that. Because the honest truth is, there are these things happening around the property where I happen to be living right now that are out of my control, and I don't currently have. So, to be perfectly honest, I don't currently have a good solution for those things that are going on around me. But not all problems are created equal. There are large challenges and there are small challenges. There's so much to do with permaculture on your land, especially when you're getting started out. I don't want to say I'm not concerned about the things that are going on around me that affect me, but I'm focusing on what I can control. And there is a lot that I can do. And it's really interesting because I have this belief, because I've seen it with other people and other projects, that some problems that we think are problems will just go away. They get solved on their own. It's kind of like the resource gathering thing where you start headed in the right direction, and maybe you get to meet your neighbors for the first time because of what you're doing on your property seems interesting to them, or there's going to be an opportunity. Either the problem will resolve itself or an even better solution will come up that I can't even think of right now. So I'm trying to just trust that that's the fact. And I honestly don't think about it that much because there's so much other to think about.
For sure, we get busy, definitely. But I'd like to challenge that because I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think you're doing something actually that mitigate those external forces. Let's take example of, you know, reducing the impact of erosion. There is like a huge water runoff from the road that was built near you, and I think in one of your videos you're talking about mitigating that and diverting water somewhere else and maybe planting some species to prevent like the erosion effect.
Yeah. So one thing that I was super happy I feel like the thought arrived to me. I didn't think about it. I just woke up. Oh, that's the solution. It was kind of like it was marinating in my mind. The water runoff happens outside of this arbitrary property line where I'm not allowed to do work. And I have a solution that would fix that problem, but I'm not allowed to work on that. So I've just made a small change on the property I can control to allow that water, some of that water, to come onto my property where I now can do what I think is best to handle that water situation. And then it's the problem becoming a resource. It becomes a solution.
Okay, can you explain what you have exactly done?
I got to wait for the next big rain, but I
Mhm.
think it's going to be about 30% of the water. I've diverted it to come onto my land in a like a gutter of sort, like you would see on the side of a house, but it's in the hillside. It's just dirt. It was very, very cheap. It was just a shovel to create this thing. And then at the end of the gutter, I've made a soakage pit. That's going to allow me to grow more food. And I'm keeping that hillside very, very vegetated so that even more water gets soaked up. And the problem with the water, I'm not looking at 100% of that water is the issue. It's just the top 30%. And that's exactly what I'm taking off to receive, so that once I take that urge of water and I bring it onto my land and accept it and deal with it through plants and soakage pits, and giving it a break, the rest of it will flow on past the property, and it hopefully won't be an issue.
Wow, that's amazing. So you've incorporated some strategies. You've turned um, the problem into the solution. You have an additional resource, and you saved neighboring land from being eroded. So that's the permaculture way of, dealing with those problems. And I think it's a great example. Um, Another thing that came to my head is in terms of maybe unregulated landfill that can be really difficult um, for some people in terms of maybe when it rains and you have all those toxins, runoff and everything. But I think permaculture also has solutions for that. For example, you can use special plants to clean the water. And I also think you've talked about these plants in one of your videos.
So, Geoff Lawton talks about drift from any pesticides that are being sprayed. If you have a neighboring farm that's choosing to spray, one of the solutions that he's come up with or that he implements is planting really tall bamboo. And this is for an instance where you don't have a lot of land, you have your growing area, and then there's just a narrow space until you go to the next property. In that narrow space, sometimes the best you can do is just plant a really narrow, really tall plant like bamboo. And it's probably like a really specific type of bamboo because there's a lot of different types. But that's something where it will pick the the spray up and over your farm. And you can do this idea with water as well. If you think there's some nasty stuff in the water that's coming onto your property, you don't want to slow it and soak it. You want to run it off of the property as best you can. And there's some really unique strategies that people have implemented. So don't despair. There's a solution.
Yes, and something specific that you can look up is the Reedbeds, which I think you're also using specifically for gray water, I think.
Yeah, and then just compost in general. Anything with that soil bacteria, you don't have to do all the work to take pollutants out of soil or water or the air. Let nature do it for you. Work with nature, and they will take all of that stuff out for you. You just have to set it up.
Exactly. And we will link some resources in the description so you can explore the topic if you're interested. Brilliant. I have a question. It is maybe controversial, but I've done it on purpose because that's something that just stuck with my head recently, and maybe I'll explain why later. So, is permaculture essential for aspiring homesteaders, and what benefits do beginners gain from using it and its principles?
Hmm, that is controversial. So, no, it is not essential. Anything that teaches you to look at an ecosystem as a whole, all the many different parts working together, anything that's going to get you to that point that you're comfortable with, use that. Um, yeah, permaculture is just the one that I like, and it feels like an umbrella that encompasses a lot of other things I'm interested in. Um, you, so I'll say this: permaculture seems like the fastest way to get people in a modern society up to speed of the knowledge of indigenous people. When people live in a village, they're with nature and working with nature every day. You don't have to teach them how to do this stuff. For myself and my peers, a lot of people, especially in the so called developed world, we don't live with nature. We are in our cars and our cubicles. And I'm not talking down on that. It's just the reality of the situation. We grew up so far detached from nature that we need to be spoon fed this information of, oh, this is how the sun moves through the sky. This is how water works in the land. Permaculture is like the quickest way. You can get somebody that has a 9 to 5 job. They work in an office. It gets them up to speed and just teaches them the basics. If there's something else that you found that you like more, if you're a yoga instructor or you're a little bit more in tune with your own personal emotions, or you prefer that sort of thing, maybe something like Sepp Holzer that's more all of your senses. So one of Sepp's students, I think his name's Zach Weiss. So he has the waterstories.com, I believe. It may be .org, but the water stories. You can take a class from him. He's going to teach you really similar to what Sepp taught him.
Okay, I love this answer. It's, as you said, it's really up to you what you're interested in. There are many different branches of knowledge that are quite connected to permaculture. For example, there is this movement, regenerative agriculture. I think regenerative agriculture is aimed more at farmers and gives them like a recipe on how to maybe build a soil culture, help them with, getting better results, better crops at no expense or lesser expense. For example, you don't have to use diesel to plow the fields, and everything is in harmony with nature. That's how I understand it. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty good description. And for me personally, I don't want to get hung up on the words, because permaculture is a word that describes something way older than the ideas in permaculture. It's I like to think about it like it's the modern person's version of working with nature. Yeah.
I like that. And one thing I would like to add is if I um, if I didn't know about permaculture, maybe I wouldn't be brave to, take this land and work on it. Um, as you said, it's like a shortcut, and it really makes everything so easy, and it gives hope that eventually everything will work out. But whether you'd like it or not, or whether you'd like to try something different, it's totally up to you. But it's something definitely worth exploring, I think.
Yeah, and kind of my personal philosophy on it is, if you just get a majority of the world's population to stop doing the terrible thing, it's a win. So that's regenerative agriculture, silvopasture, permaculture, all these different things. Like I was saying, they incorporate all the design elements. It's not, I'm going to grow corn and that's it. Um, you really, you start to grow, and whatever design method you choose to use, go for it. It doesn't have to be permaculture. That's just what I've fallen in love with, and it suits my personality. So that's what I'm sharing. I'm not trying to push anybody to do it. I just think it has changed my life. So naturally, I'm going to be excited about telling people.
I love that. Okay, last question. So, in the last video, you highlighted how education is like a key aspect. For someone new to permaculture and interested in this topic, where would you recommend they start their learning journey? How can individuals drawn to permaculture deepen their knowledge and actively contribute to improving their surroundings?
Hmm. So I would say, without question, take an online permaculture design course if you can afford it. I think right now, at least Geoff Lawton's course, which is what I took, was very, very pleased with it. That's what I would 100% recommend. That's going to be around 2,000 US dollars. I did not have the money at the time when I took the course. I took on debt. I do not regret it. It changed my life. It organized my thoughts, and I have no personal financial benefit for telling people to sign up and pay that kind of money. I just know that if you can come up with the money some way to take that course, you're going to get a tremendous amount of value. Uh, if some of the things we've talked about in this video, if you want to do something that's more all of your senses and you're smelling the dirt and things like that, maybe something like the waterstories.com. Look into some of the programs they offer. If you don't want to pay anything, the first place I would say look is Andrew Millison. He's on YouTube. He's a professional educator at a university, and he takes the classroom online for free and shares all of his information. He is a wealth of knowledge and a tremendous resource, and so generous with his time and knowledge. He just gives it away for free. Um, and if you're looking more into the water bit, the Brad Lancaster, his YouTube channel, as well as his book, Rainwater Harvesting for Drylands and Beyond. If you want a book uh, instead of something online or something like that. But I'd recommend the online course over in person, because in person, you're looking at 2 to 3 weeks. Sometimes it's even less. Online, it's about 6 months, and it is in depth. You get so much information. Whereas in person, you might miss a lot. You might have to redo it.
Fantastic. We will link all those resources, websites, people's YouTube channels in the description so you can have a look if you're interested. And I think Jeff's Lawton's recent courses are 1 year long, even. So, even more time to consume information. Amazing. Adam, thank you so much for your time, for meeting us again and sharing your knowledge. It was a pleasure to speaking to you.
Thank you so much, Eva. I really appreciate these talks with you.